Dear fellow truth seekers, thank you and welcome for visiting my channel, MythoReligio. MythoReligio is a series of books about religious comparison studies between the stories in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism and Buddhism, directly from their sacred books and world mythologies, hence the name MythoReligio. The purpose is to retrace the prehistory of humanity, since I am not fully satisfied with either the explanations from the point of view of creationists nor evolutionists. There are so many missing links in both explanations. If you feel the same, then you are on the right channel. In this book series, I will also analyze about the prehistory of humanity from the archaeological records, modern scientific point of view, and other alternative theories, such as the ancient alien theories and Atlantis or Lemuria legends. After thorough research of circa 30 years, I recognize many similarities between all religious stories and even mythologies, and surprisingly, some of them are in accordance or even beyond modern science that have been proven as correct. Thus, I came to the conclusion that all religions must have come from the same source. And all these religious stories and mythologies, although heavily jumbled up, are actually telling one mega story, the true prehistory of our common ancestors. This mega story is quite different than what we have been told to believe and will truly blow your mind, as it is more fascinating than our imagination. If you have watched the earlier videos in this channel, I believe you can see some of the similarities too. If you haven't and you truly want to do a religious comparative study, I suggest that you do so. The best way to do a comprehensive religious study via this channel is by watching the videos starting from number 1 and continue until this present video and so on. That way you will see a clear pattern. For deeper analysis that I cannot share in this platform due to its sensitive nature that leads to the above conclusion, kindly read the books that are available in ebook format that can be found in my website www.mythoreligio.com or the physical books at Amazon in color or black and white version. Australian and Oceanian mythologies. Dear fellow truth seekers, in this video, I'll be sharing some myths from Australia and Oceania. This is a part of the last section of myth telling from around the world that are somewhat similar to the Abrahamic religious stories and are important for our religious comparison study. In my previous videos, I have shared the main stories from the 5 major religions, i.e. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism and Buddhism. Then I continued with myth-telling from the major regions of the world, i.e. the Middle East, Europe, Africa, America, and Asia. And as mentioned previously, now I'll be telling some myths from the last regions that are Australia and Oceania. I am aware that these are a vast region, but the Aboriginal people of Australia actually belong to more or less the same ethnic group of Oceanian people, i.e. Micronesian, Polynesian, and Melanesian. Therefore, I group them together. And although today Hawaii is a part of the United States of America, it is not a part of the North American mainland. Rather, it is located in the Pacific Ocean, and geographically, it is considered to be located in Oceania. The name Australia or Terra Australis means the southern land. The historical European name for mainland Australia was New Holland, in Dutch Nieuw Holland. The name was first applied to Australia in 1644 by the Dutch seafarer Abel Tasman. In 1770, the east coast of New Holland had been mapped by Captain James Cook. So the British thought this territory, despite being inhabited by indigenous people for 60,000 years, was the perfect dumping ground for their excess criminals. An 8-month boat trip 10,000 miles across the sea soon became the punishment for thieving a bag of sugar or a loaf of bread. This is how Australia became populated by Europeans. Now, Hawaii only became a formal US territory in 1959. This happened because in 1898, the Spanish-American War broke out, and the strategic use of the naval base at Pearl Harbor in the island of Oahu, Hawaii, during the war convinced Congress to approve formal annexation. Obviously, for our comparison study, we are only concerned with the myth from the original inhabitants of these regions, and not of the European newcomers. So let's begin with the Australian Aborigine creation myth. Baiame was a creation ancestral hero who came down from the sky to the land and created rivers, mountains, and forests. He then created men and women to rule over them. Then, similar to the Lord God in the Old Testament, he fashioned the first human from the dust of the ridges and said, "These are the plants you shall eat, this and this, but not the animals I have created." After having set them in a good place, Baiame departed. Before departing, Baiame also created the first initiation site. This is known as a bora, a place where boys were initiated into manhood. When he had finished, he returned to the sky. People called him the Sky Hero or All-Fathers. Like the Jewish Yahweh, it was forbidden to mention or talk about the name of Baiame publicly. Women were not allowed to see drawings of Baiame nor approach the Bora sites. To the first men and women, children were born to them, and to their children's children. His world had begun to be populated, and men and women praised Baiame for providing for their needs. Sun and rain brought life to the plants that provided their sustenance. All was well in the world, until a year when the rain ceased to fall and famine struck, forcing a man out of desperation to kill some of the forbidden animals, i.e. kangaroo rats. Out of anger, Yowie, the spirit of death, came and took the life of another man who actually refused to eat the forbidden animal. For the first time since creation, death had come to one of the men whom Baiame had created. All living things mourned because a man who was alive was now as dead as the kangaroo rat they had killed for food. It was a sad conclusion to the hopes of a world in the making, but the bright light of the Southern Cross constellation is a sign to men that there is a place for them in the limitless regions of space, the home of the All-Father himself, and that beyond death lies a new creation. The Ark Gumana. The Australian Aborigines also tell of a story similar to the biblical story of Noah, with a twist. In the Australian version, the flood started because of mischievous children who were hurting an innocent bird, and this enraged the gods. A storm cloud appeared, filling the sky, and the earth was flooded so high that only the tops of a few enormous mountains were not covered. One man rapidly tried to escape the flood by rowing his canoe to the top of a mountain, where he arrived safely with several other survivors. The people who did not reach the mountain tops were killed. There is another legend of a flood called the Dreamtime Flood. Riding on this flood was the Waramba, or the Ark Gumana. Strangely enough, the name of the survivor is exactly the same as the biblical Noah. So, in this ark was Noah, the Aborigines, and various animals. The ark eventually came to rest in the plain of Gilinbadu, where it can still be found. Now let's go to the Hawaiian creation myth. The Hawaiian triad gods are called Ku, Kaua, Gahi, or the fundamental supreme deity, consist of Kane, Ku, and Lono, or sunlight, substance, and sound. These gods existed from eternity, from and before chaos. By an act of their will, these gods dissipated or broke into pieces the existing surrounding, all containing Po, night, or chaos. By this act, light entered into space. It then created the heavens, 3 in number, as a place to dwell in and the earth to be their footstool. Next, they created the sun, moon, stars, and a host of angels or spirits to minister to them. Lastly, like the biblical god, the Hawaiian god created men in the likeness of the god Kane. The body of the first man was made of red earth and the spittle of the gods. When the earth image of Kane was ready, the 3 gods breathed into its nose and it became a living being. And also, like the biblical Eve, the first woman was created from one of the ribs of the man while asleep. And this too were the progenitors of all mankind. They're called in the chants and in various legends by a large number of different names, but the most common for the man was Kumu Honua and for the woman Lala Honua. The oldest son of Kumu Honua was called Laka, and that the next was called Ahu. Laka was a bad man. So like biblical Cain who killed his brother, Laka killed his brother Ahu. The sacred apple tree. The original ancestral seed of mankind had a number of names. One of the names is Pali Uli, the Blue Mountain. It was a sacred tabooed land that a man must be righteous to attain. If faulty or sinful, he will not get there. Similar to the biblical forbidden tree of Eden, in this place grew the Ulu Kapu Akane, the breadfruit tabooed for Kane, and the Ohia Himolele, the sacred apple tree. According to the olden time priests, the tabooed fruits of these trees were in some manner connected with the trouble and death of Kumu Honua and Lala Honua. Nu and the flood. In the Hawaiian group, there are several legends of the flood. One legend relates that in the time of Nu or Nana Nu, the flood came upon the earth and destroyed all living beings. Nu, by command of his god, built a large vessel with a house on top of it, which was called the royal vessel, in which he and his family, consisting of his wife Lilinoe, his 3 sons and their wives, were safe. When the flood subsided, the 3 gods, Kane, Ku, and Lono, entered the vessel of Nu and told him to go out. He did so and found himself on the top of Mauna Kea, the highest mountain on the island of Hawaii. He named a cave there after his wife, and it remains there to this day, as the legend says in testimony of the fact. Other versions of the legend say that Nu landed and dwelt in Kahiki Honua Kele, a large and extensive country. Nu left the vessel in the evening of the day and took with him a pig, cocoa nuts, and awa, some kind of juice, as an offering to the god Kane. The biblical Noah too performed burnt offerings to the Lord God after being saved from the great flood, as told in the book of Genesis. Isn't that amazing how strikingly similar some of these stories are with the Abrahamic religious stories? And historically, this region is the last region in the world that was Christianized by Christian missionaries in the early 19th century CE, and supposedly they had no contact with the Western world previous to the coming of the Europeans to this area. Why are there so many similar religious stories and mythologies around the world? Are they really merely copying or borrowing from one another? If yes, then how? And when did they do that? I will share my own analysis, which I believe is quite different than any other theories that you might have heard before. But I will do that after I'm finished sharing more stories from Hawaii next week. Then I will compare them with scientific data and/or archaeological findings to make sense out of them. Thank you for watching and hope to see you next week.